Welcome to Wartime Cafe. We are back in Mizian Coffee Shop restaurant on Hamra Street. We've been off for almost 2 months now of no episodes of Wartime Cafe because of personal needs and also what we just saw, the breakout of the war. We have a special guest with us again. Dr. Jamal Wakim was with us here in episode 2 of Wartime Cafe in a different location. It's been now 5 months, Dr. Wakim, since that episode. A lot has happened. Our audience knows you, so we're not going to ask a lot of personal questions. And there's so much to talk about in terms of the urgency of the situation. But just to remind our viewers, you are a professor of history and international relations at the Lebanese University, and this is where I'm going to ask you the first question. Right now, there's bombardment of Lebanon. All universities and schools have been closed down. Many schools have been turned into shelters for the internally displaced. How is the situation at the university, the Lebanese University? What are their preparations? How is the students and professors and administrators dealing with the situation?
Well, the ministry decided to close down the universities until further notice, and we were actually preparing for the new year when we had to close down. So now we're waiting because all students are mainly from the south, from the southern suburb of Beirut, and from the Beqa cannot attend their classes. So, and other regions have been hosting the refugees. Some of them are being sheltered in schools and universities campuses. So that's why I believe that we need to wait until further notice to reopen schools and universities.
We know already the schools that are closer to the south have almost got overwhelmed now with internally displaced. At some point, probably universities like the Lebanese University will be also used in shelters.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it could be. That's a possibility, yes.
And given that our vicious criminal enemy, the Zionists, have a habit of purposefully targeting schools when they are used as shelters, do you believe this is increasing the danger on the schools and the universities?
Based on what happened in Gaza, I believe that's a risk that we're running, but there is no alternative because many displaced now have been hosted in schools, in universities, etc. Some of them are heading towards Syria. For example, some of them are trying to get the better off. Actually, the middle class are trying to rent houses, but this cannot accommodate the majority of the displaced people who are coming from poor background. So. Yeah, that's a possibility, especially in a country that lacks air defense system and that lacks, of course, we're talking about the state, about the army. And so far, we don't know about the capabilities of the resistance in having such an air defense against the most sophisticated planes that are supplied by the United States to the Zionist entity. And this is our biggest problem. Which is that we're partly not only fighting Israel, but we're in reality fighting the United States military.
Okay. So before we go there, let's go back a step and talk about the beginnings of this Zionist attack on Lebanon. It started with the cyber terrorism attack on the pagers and the walkie-talkies. You are an expert of international relations. You know all the treaties. How big of a violation of international law and the norms of war was this cyber terrorist attack?
Well, that could amount to a war crime, especially that these pagers and beepers and walkie-talkies were mostly used by civilians working in various institutions. Some of them were owned by Hezbollah, like hospitals and some others, or supermarkets, for example, and some others were not, were owned by independent people. So these hospitals, usually we know that beepers and pagers are used for internal communication within the institution, within hospitals, within schools, universities, and other, let's say, civilian institutions. Of course, there were some that were used by Hezbollah operatives, but the attack was indiscriminate in the sense that it targeted, or maybe they had in mind to target Hezbollah operatives, but at the same time they knew that these beepers and pagers were talkie-walkies were used also by civilians, and they decided to go for the attack knowing that 90% of the victims would be civilians, but for them it was a collateral damage, the way usually not only Israel but also the United States government thinks of our people. And I would like to note or quote Madeleine Albright, the former minister of or secretary of the United States during the Clinton administration, when she said that 500,000 children killed in Iraq by the sanctions were a mere collateral damage. This is how they look at our people. And that's why I believe that we have no choice but to fight back. We've been, they say that we need to go back to international community, to international law and whatever. But we know that there were hundreds and hundreds of resolutions passed by the Security Council and by the General Committee or General Assembly of the United Nations that were overlooked, bypassed, breached, and violated by Israel with the backing of the United States. So that's why we cannot but rely on the resistance and warding off the threats directed against our people.
You know, yesterday I was watching one of these Western news shows, and the Zionist pedophile lawyer Alan Dershowitz was on air talking about this terrorist attack. And he claimed it's not terrorist, although it breaches the international treaties on booby trapping civilian objects. And he also argued that although the majority of even Hezbollah operatives that got harmed or martyred in this attack were actually out during their civilian life, not in their military fatigue. They were not on the war front. And he claimed that although they were not in their military fatigue, they were not on the war front, that this is a legitimate target. So wouldn't that mean that actually every Israeli soldier, every Israeli citizen who's between 18 and 45, who are all on reserve duty, are also legitimate targets in their pizzerias, like during the Second Intifada?
Well, okay. I need to rely on what you said and go back to the Second World War. That was the same logic used by the Nazis to target civilians, claiming that these civilians could be potential fighters. So they were judging people on intentions, okay, or on mere probability. So this proves that the Zionists are a mere extension of the Nazis. Okay, and that's why we've been suffering from these practices by the Zionists against our people, whether the Palestinian people, the Lebanese people, the Syrian people, Jordanian, Egyptian, and other Arab nationalities. Not to forget about maybe there were other victims in the third world countries, either by the Zionists or by Western imperialist powers. So we've been suffering for too long from these practices, and yet there was no justice done for the victims. And this makes us more convinced that our only way is to fight back.
What do you think are the repercussions of this cyber terrorism attack in terms of cybersecurity globally and or the market supply chain? Who's, already we're hearing different governments ordering their cabinet members and their staff of the government to throw away certain devices. And what are some of the repercussions of this lunatic act by the Zionists?
Well, it made most countries worried. The first reaction was by the Russians, by the way, who came over here and investigated the matter because they feared that the Israelis would pass over the know-how of how to booby-trap civilian devices on to the Ukrainians. But there were other countries, even those who are on good terms with the Israelis, that got worried because the Israelis, with their action, actually made most countries alarmed that this could happen to them, especially that geographic contingency here wouldn't be a precondition for waging such attacks. You can wage such an attack remotely on faraway and distant countries if you know how to infiltrate the international market and how to produce these devices on a mass level and then sell it to the destined victim. Okay, and that was one of the reasons why the Irish government was worried. Maybe other governments weren't that vocal about their worry, but still, I think what the Israelis did amounted to a mass murder by a lunatic who would alarm most people, not only the victim of this lunatic. Especially that we know very well about the Israeli capabilities in the world of artificial intelligence, and we know that there are a lot of international companies that are partly owned by Israelis who used to be officers in the Mossad, and after retiring, they ventured in artificial intelligence, and actually they were in the artificial intelligence section in the Mossad, and then when they retired, they opened companies. And we know very well that a security or an intelligence agent never retires. Never. Okay, and The Guardian, I believe, a year ago, raised the issue of the implication of artificial intelligence companies owned by Israelis in manipulating elections in more than 50 countries around the world, many of them in Africa, but some of them even in Europe, in order to produce, and Latin America, in order to produce results favorable to people who are favorable to Israel.
Yeah. Well, we know, of course, three of the top AI companies in the West are owned by Israelis and for quote-unquote former Mossad agents. We didn't have time to take a breath after those cyber terrorist attacks. There was the speech of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, was followed by the assassination of the head of the Radwan forces, the offensive forces of Hezbollah, and now bombardment for the last 2 days. Were any of this something that you expected to happen? Like, let's say 5 months ago when we met in Wartime Cafe, were your expectations that today we could be sitting here with, talking about the possibility of a regional war or a bigger war happening?
Well, actually, I didn't expect the Americans or the American administration to be that crazy to let go of Netanyahu and allow him to escalate the situation to that extent. But I believe that we need to see what's going on in the United States. There is a degradation of the elite, the political elite ruling that country, and there is this might lead to a collapse of a sudden collapse of the United States as a superpower, because they are if they are breaching all rational calculations, okay, in this regard. But from Netanyahu's perspective, that was a very calculated move, by the way, because after 11 months, he couldn't achieve a decisive victory or even tangible results against the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. We started witnessing the rise of the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank, and he knows very well that the resistance, the Lebanese resistance, is the window from which the Palestinian resistance breathes. So in order to suffocate the Palestinian resistance, in Netanyahu's mind, a blow to Hezbollah was necessary. He thought that by using a shock and awe strategy, which is to direct a blow to the communication system of Hezbollah, and at the same time to direct a blow to the military command of Hezbollah, he could force Hezbollah to subdue without a fight. And this is something that Sayyid Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, said in his speech prior to the blow to the military command, that there were threats coming to Hezbollah after the first strike, after the pagers explosions, that Hezbollah needs to stop the fight in support of Gaza. When Hezbollah refused, we had the Tokiwoki explosions. When he refused, a further strike was directed against the commanders of, or some military commanders. However, this, despite the severe losses injured by Hezbollah, we saw that Hezbollah retained control. The first wave of attacks against Israel, against the northern parts of occupied Palestine, and this have been continuing for the past 3 days. Okay, this was the reason why Netanyahu thought of causing a humanitarian disaster by waging attacks against the civilians in order to force them out of their homes in southern Lebanon and some regions in the Beqa, and create a burden on Hezbollah and the Lebanese government how to handle the displaced issue. So these strikes against the civilians that led to the death of 600 people on one day, which is a huge number, and the injury of thousands more, was a calculated step and an intentional crime, intended crime by Netanyahu. But his calculations didn't achieve the aimed result, which
Well,
is
at least with
to
his
paralyze
declared.
Hezbollah and lead it to bow to him without a fight. And now I believe that we will be going on in this back and forth shelling between Hezbollah and the Zionist entity until a time when Netanyahu would realize that he will be cornered and he will be forced onto a land attack. And in this case, I believe he would be running a big risk of defeat, and of course this would end his political career and would have severe repercussions for Israel, because if Israel or the Israeli army couldn't achieve a victory against the Palestinian resistance that is besieged in an open space in Gaza, that is encircled from all sides, after 11 months, how would he be able to achieve any tangible result against Hezbollah in a much more complicated and rugged terrain in southern Lebanon, with a guerrilla group that has much more capabilities and that has a strategic depth, whether in the Beqa or in Syria, noting that the way for volunteers would be open to come from Pakistan, Central Asia, and other countries in Asia. In this case, Netanyahu wouldn't be fighting only the Lebanese resistance, but he would be fighting thousands and thousands of people who would be willing to sacrifice themselves in order to achieve divine victory. We need not underestimate the religious conviction that leads these people and that makes them willing for the ultimate sacrifice, something that we don't have on the other side.
Well, you know, and the people in the West don't understand this. On the one hand, you have the Zionists telling us God's chosen people, Armageddon, the promised land, and the West wants to deny that that's the religious language. And then also they want to deny the power of conviction that the people in our lands here, Christian and Muslim, have for the justness of their fight for liberation of Palestine. I want to take us back to this idea of Netanyahu's war objectives. I mean, he's
Well,
declared
first,
war.
let me comment on that.
Yeah.
Our biggest crisis with the Western mentality is its unwillingness of understanding things the way they are, and their underestimation of non-Westerners, whether being Arabs, Muslims, Russians, Orthodox, etc., Africans. And their biggest problem was their starting point, which claims that they are superior to others. And I believe that this mentality would lead the West to its collapse, because they are posing themselves against the rest of humanity. We have the West and the rest, okay? And this is the biggest problem. They allow themselves something that they deny to others, and at the same time, they claim to be rational, yet they rely in their claims, and here I'm talking about the seculars who rely on unjustified religious stories that should be understood in their essence and not in their, let's say, appearance. Okay?
Metaphorical, not literal.
Noting that this Old Testament or the Bible is the let's say the sum up of our tradition, by the way, and the Zionists who came from Eastern Europe are non-Semitic or non-Arabs.
And descendants of converts.
Of converts of Turkish origins, okay? The Ashkenazis, etc. Go back to the 8th century, 7th and 8th century, the Khazar kingdom that converted to Judaism in the Caucasus, and that was destroyed by the Orthodox Rus, who established themselves in Kiev. So a problem in the West that was projected onto our region as they stole Palestine and named it Israel. They stole our book of tradition, let's say, which is the Bible, the Old Testament, okay, and claimed it was their national book, as they stole our falafel and claimed that it was their national dish, or the hummus.
Yes, and the hummus is hummus.
Hummus, by the way.
Hummus, Hamas, Hezbollah.
Hummus, it's not tasty, by the way. Hummus, they must have added some bad ingredients to it, so beware.
You know, I saw in Canada they were selling a pumpkin spice hummus. Pumpkin spice hummus, chocolate
This is
hummus.
Zionism, by the way.
This is
Zionism.
They wanted to. They were so angry that the regular Canadians and Americans are eating hummus so much. They're like, let's ruin this and make it pumpkin spice hummus.
So hummus, it's no longer out of chickpeas. It's out of pumpkin. Man. Oh my God. Yeah.
No, pumpkin spice that they put on the coffee.
And worse, okay, the sons of Israel, which should be us, okay, who were Jews at one time. Some of them converted to Christianity, some others converted to Islam. Now they take the chickpea, okay, and they replaced it with the pumpkin coming from Eastern Europe, and I don't like the taste already.
I saw it, I got scared, honestly. I didn't want to even look at it. So let's go back to Netanyahu's declared war goals. I mean, he declared those 3 goals for Gaza, you know, destroying Hamas, taking back the hostages, quote unquote, and
I like he always mentions 3 goals. I don't know if he had the intention to convert to Orthodox Christianity.
the God, the Father, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
But then he added an extra
he needs
Holy
to get
Spirit.
baptized.
He added the goal for the war here, which is to push supposedly Hezbollah behind the Litani, and to return the Zionist colonists to the north of Palestine. Now, me and you and anybody who's rational, looking at the 3 goals for Gaza and the goal here, we can clearly see that these are unachievable goals. Okay, in rational.
You need to say that to Netanyahu.
Well, for me, once I see that, I come to the conclusion that the actual goal is undeclared, which is, as we see, genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and now the beginnings of genocide and ethnic cleansing in the south of Lebanon. If he cannot really achieve any of his declared goals, isn't his actions, so because we only judge people with their actions, not words, and if we take it to his goals, isn't this really his only goal that he's aiming for?
I don't know what he's aiming for, but I believe that he has already failed in most declared objectives. Okay? So one more failure wouldn't make a change for him, you know. So I believe that he's stuck in a way. And that's why he's stumbling. He's been fighting on all fronts now. He thinks that by escalating the situation, he could make a change. yet nothing is happening. He's, let's say, getting more and more in trouble. I don't know if he wants to go as far as a regional, as have a regional conflict directly with Iran and drawing the United States into it. Maybe that's why he favors the election of Donald Trump, because I don't know who's rational now in the United States. Is it Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, or I don't know. Really, that's, despite the fact that the United States has been supporting our enemies for too long, but there is a big difference between those who ruled the United States back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s. When we look at Bill Clinton, and then the bunch of mediocre people who came to power in the United States, starting with George W. Bush, who had a direct relationship with God Almighty. Yeah, and then I don't know if he was talking to God Almighty or Jim Carrey Almighty, Bruce Almighty. And then we need to ask George W. Bush.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Obama, who was smart, yet he was a figurehead. I believe that he was a facade for public relations.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had Donald Trump competing against a lunatic that is Hillary Clinton. Then he was beaten by a more mediocre, who is Joe Biden. And then Joe Biden was missing, let's say,
Vegetable.
Yeah, and then he chose Kamala Harris, okay, as his replacement. So I don't know who is worse. They compete, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's a very hard
They compete on
competition.
who's more Zionist, who's more bloodthirsty.
But worse, who's more irrational
Yeah.
and who's more mediocre.
Yeah.
That's a big crisis for the United States itself.
So before we jump into the U.S., what they want to do here,
Yeah.
it's now the third day of bombardment, end of the second day of bombardment by the Israelis and the retaliation by the Hizb. Much of the south of Lebanon, the villages are bombarded. A lot of refugees to the rest of the country. Everything south of Saida, almost even Ghazi, just on the edges of Saida, is being hit multiple times a day.
And even Beirut, the suburbs of Beirut are being hit.
Yeah, so and the Beqa Valley, all the border with Syria, all the way to the north, and of course the Dahiya. It's second day in a row attacks on buildings in the Dahiya. So we just began seeing right now the retaliation of the Hizb reaching kind of a crescendo. In the first day, as Israel was bombarding the south of Lebanon, it seems like the Hizb held itself back a little bit to allow the evacuation of the south, so the Israelis don't take vengeance on the civilians that are leaving. But since the morning, the Hizb has announced at least 18 operations, hitting the major airfields of the Israelis.
Not only that, the Israeli televisions were reporting that some bases were on flame, completely destroyed. And by the way, this is where we could have a further escalation that would destabilize Europe itself. The Europeans or European leaders are the most stupid of all, because by abiding by the US diktat, they are damaging their own national security. Now, Cyprus have been offering some facilities for the Israeli military, and the resistance in Lebanon knows that. And Sayyid Nasrallah already threatened, even before the escalation of the situation, that if Cyprus allows Israel to use its airports, these airports will be bombarded.
So Hezbollah did bombard the Ramat David
Yeah.
airbase just outside Haifa, which is the largest airbase in the north. It's one of 3 major airbases. They also hit the replacement, basically, airbase, the Majido airbase near Afula, around the Lake Tabariya. And we're already seeing the Israelis use external airbases in Cyprus. Yes.
So next step might be shelling Cyprus. That's a European country that is entering into a regional conflict. And there is one more thing that the Europeans fear from, which is the refugees. We already have like 2 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. What if these people who are already running away from war in Syria, now they are facing war in Lebanon? Some of them were
There's
killed.
already a family of 7
Yeah.
Syrians that were martyred on the first
That's
day.
that's a fraction of the real number, by the way. So what if these people who have no other option would run the risk of going into Cyprus, okay, and from there venture to other Greek islands, all the way to Greece, Italy, and from there onto the heart of Europe, okay? So that's a question. Would the Europeans be able to accommodate like 2 million? And by the way, this wouldn't be limited only to Syrian refugees. We also have Palestinian refugees, and many Lebanese might opt for that option, okay? That's another issue. If the Israelis choose to attack Iran, and if they drag the United States onto this conflict, we have a lot of military bases, US military bases, that would be targeted by Iran.
You keep on jumping ahead.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
let's just take it.
Okay. And one more thing, which would be even worse, which is the economic impact. Would the United States and global economy afford a skyrocketing price of the barrel of oil from around $70 or $80 now up to 300 or 400 in one sky?
Yeah. So they hit the air bases. Then they also began hitting the major gathering bases and supply route bases and the warehouses holding the ammunition, as well as just before we started recording here, the Atlit naval base just south of Haifa, one of the major naval bases of the Israelis. So, and the artillery bases in the Golan Heights. All of this seems like as if it's a preparation of the grounds for a possible ground war, where in case the Israelis invade, that actually the resistance will also be able to invade North Palestine, and more so the Golan Heights.
We had a sample on October 7. What the Hamas fighters did was something that they learned from Hezbollah. And as I said before, Hamas had less capabilities or have less capabilities than Hezbollah. And the terrain in northern Palestine is much more rugged and complicated than the one in Gaza and around Gaza. So, and in case of a land attack by Israel that could be counter-attacked by the guerrilla fighters of Hezbollah, all lines of communication for a modern army would be damaged. And at the same time, what if an attack by Hezbollah would link up with the West Bank? I believe that Netanyahu is crazy.
Yeah. They already, Hezbollah hit colonies in the Northwest Bank around Jenin and Tul Karim yesterday. And there was, we hear at least that there is at least 200,000 Yemeni fighters on the ground in around the Golan Heights and or
There was something reported by Haaretz, Israeli newspaper, that Netanyahu or the military command, Israeli military command, is worried about the possibility of the flow of around 40,000 fighters coming from various countries to fight alongside Hezbollah, starting from the Golan Heights front. On a geopolitical level, why things would be more crucial for the Zionist entity from the north? Because the north, and mainly the Galilee, has always been the gateway onto Palestine. During the Crusades, the Crusaders used to, all attempts at liberating Palestine from the Crusaders were coming from the Golan and from the what we call
Yarmouk Valley,
the Yarmouk Valley, the Tabaraya,
the Sea of Galilee in
yeah,
English,
the Sea of Galilee. It was there that the Hattin battle occurred, 1187, and it was also there that the Mamluks warded off the Mongols in 1260 in Ain Jalut. Because whoever takes control of the Sea of Galilee would be able to venture alongside the wedge that is an extension of the Biqa Valley onto the Jordan Valley, where the Jordan River passes all the way in order to separate Palestine hinterland from the coastal area. That's what Salah ad-Din did, by the way. So now, Netanyahu, by opening this battle there, and by the way, just before continuing, in 1973, though the Egyptian army was much stronger and posed a bigger threat to the Israelis, but the Israelis concentrated their effort in the first few days against the Syrians and the Golan Heights and the Galilee and the Lake of Tabaraya in order to ward off what they considered as an existential threat. So now that Netanyahu is opening this front and venturing on an open fight with Hezbollah, if he further escalates, things are still in the beginning. If he further escalates the situation and goes as far as an open war, I believe that this would totally run contrary to his calculations. And I don't know if he would be rendering us a service of giving us the possibility, if not of liberating Palestine, but at least in directing a severe blow that would paralyze this entity and rendering it a paralyzed, let's say, power that would deteriorate from within until its extinction.
Yeah, so, we were starting to talk about the Americans. There is already, we heard last week Biden's administration saying there will be no ceasefire until the coming of the next president. So in a way, that was kind of saying to Netanyahu, do what you want until mid-January. We also heard the Secretary of Defense saying that they will defend Israel against any attack. There's already 5 aircraft carrier fighting groups on the way to the region. One of them is very close right now.
I like that,
Yes.
Because these same carriers couldn't do anything against the Houthis in Bab el-Mandeb. Maybe they are, let's say, giving Hezbollah the possibility of having more lucrative targets.
And there was 5 American transport aircraft with hundreds of soldiers on them that landed in Tel Aviv and in Cyprus over the last 24 hours. There is 2 amphibious landing groups of the Israeli Navy that are training in Crete as we speak with the NATO. So there, it at least from the looks of it, this could be just threats to scare off the Hezbollah and
But
or
even, by the way, even if they choose to fight alongside the Israelis, we know very well that there are thousands and thousands of mercenaries that are fighting alongside the Israeli army.
right now in Gaza.
Yeah, there were some reports reported that in the Israeli army there are more than 20,000 U.S. citizens fighting, or people who have the U.S. citizenship, who are fighting alongside or in the Israeli army. We had people from other parts, Azerbaijanis, Kurds, Africans, Ukrainians, Europeans, who were fighting, British, French, etc., who were fighting alongside. What if they even fight with them? They have been trying to do the same in Ukraine. Did that change the course of events?
So you think that it's not going to make a difference, but do you feel that which one is more likely, that this is just a threat or actually that they will get
So
involved?
far, I believe that the United States wouldn't get implicated directly in the conflict. It's already part of the conflict. It's giving expertise, information, intelligence, planning. By the way, prior to this latest attack, there were a lot of NATO experts visiting the Israelis and maybe coordinating with them, giving them advice how to wage the attack, etc. But this wouldn't change much. So if they, I don't think that the United States would be interested in, let's say, being open in its involvement in the fight so far.
Okay, my final question, because we're taking so much time and we all have to go back to our areas in Lebanon that's in the middle of the night right now. It was just a few hours ago, the United Nations General Assembly was having all these speeches by different leaders that are there for the annual meeting. And the King of Jordan got on stage. They had to put a box for him to stand, literally. I couldn't believe that when they put the box for him to get.
I pity the box.
so he clearly was, talking about Palestinian rights and bringing aid and genocide this, genocide that. But we saw just the night before the Jordanian air defenses shooting down Iraqi, or they claim to have shot down Iraqi drones going to support the Palestinian people in attacking locations in the Zionist Colony. What do you think would happen to a country like Jordan if an all-out war breaks out with Lebanon? And for sure, the Iraqi resistance and others are going to be involved. What will happen inside Jordan, countries like this in the region?
Well, Jordan is in real danger because the Israeli plan, original plan, was to expel the Palestinian people from the West Bank onto Jordan and implicate the Palestinian people and the Jordanian people in a civil war. Too bad, when we talk about that, we should admit the fact that the ruler doesn't mind that, because this Abdullah is the son of Hussein, who is the son of Talal, who was, like, say, evicted from power in conspicuous circumstances, who is the son of Abdullah, who is the son of Sharif Hussein, who was a British collaborator. So this dynasty is a dynasty of collaborators who have no grassroots in Jordan, and they have been doing their job as agents. Even King Hussein had actually a code name in the CIA. He had a salary by the CIA, and I believe that his code name was Mr. Beef. Okay? I don't know what's the code name of Abdullah the second.
Mr. Salami.
Mr. Salami, Mr. Beef. So, I don't know if he's vegan, by the way.
Not from the look of it.
Mr. Pumpkin.
Mr. Manstaf, maybe.
Fine. At one point, would he care much if he runs away and takes a pile of money with him?
Like the Shah of Iran.
Like the Shah or other rulers who were, let's say, backed up by the United States, like Batista in Cuba, for example.
King Farouk in Egypt.
King Farouk, yeah, Hadaki, he enjoyed more Italy, by the way. And he enjoyed food. He died because he had a big feast at one point, and he exploded.
Okay. Well, we are laughing about all of this. Sometimes the only thing that we can do is to laugh at our situation. Inshallah, we will all get through this safely. Liberation of Palestine is near. The liberation of Lebanese villages is near. The liberation of the Golan is there, inshallah. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamal Wakim, for being with us at this very dangerous time. Our viewers, you can go to our website, freepalestine.video. Please donate and subscribe for monthly donations. We have journalists on the ground in the West Bank, journalists here in South Lebanon. We're reporting for you the daily activities on the ground in the field. We're translating all the videos of the Axis of Resistance operations and much more. Until I see you next time, I bid you all a free Palestine.